Xi'an, literally Western Peace, has a history of more than 3,000 years. Located right in the heart of the country, between fertile plains, deserts, mountains, and the sea, it was the capital of China in the first millennium BC and into the next. Xi'an was positioned at the eastern extremity of the Silk Road, which shows the interest that the Chinese had in neighboring civilizations like those of India or Persia. Not only commercial goods, but also cultures and religions passed through this route. Today, Xi'an has more than 8 million inhabitants and is one of the 10 largest Chinese cities. But the star attraction in Xi'an is certainly its buried army. As essential as the Great Wall or the Forbidden City, it is said that the buried army is the 8th wonder of the world. 2,000 years old, but despite that, incredibly well preserved, it was the foremost scientific discovery in the 20th century, unearthed in 1974. It is the tomb of the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huangdi, who lived in the 3rd century BC. The excavations, stretching over an area of 20,000 square meters, revealed about 7,000 terracotta statues of warriors and horses, around 100 wooden war chariots, and countless weapons, all divided amongst several large pits. Pit number 1 is certainly the most impressive. It is 230 meters long and 62 meters wide, and contains the main army with more than 6,000 terracotta warriors. In the beginning, the armed soldiers were painted with vivid colors that unfortunately disappeared after the burning of the pits by the Han rebels. They are distinguished from each other by their size, uniform, and hair, and in particular their morphology and their different expressions, to the point that you could believe that a real army served as the model. The pit contains 11 3-meter-wide aisles that were buried beneath a layer of clay to perfect the seal. According to estimates, there are still 6,000 statues of warriors and horses waiting to be unearthed in pit number 1 alone, 2 times what there is now. The Terracotta Army has been part of the UNESCO World Heritage List since 1987, and according to scientists, it will take 100 years to restore all of the statues, because they estimate that they have only unearthed 30% of the gigantic artificial army of the Qin Dynasty emperor. Now large buildings have been built to protect these pits. One of them holds a great number of chariots. You can see the war chariots that they used to attack enemy lines at the time. The wooden chariots have disappeared over time and have been restored with great expertise. The clay horses, however, have not aged a day. Some bronze chariots, which seem to be armored, also appear in the reliefs. The drivers are, much like the horses, in excellent condition. The burying of this army was ordered in 246 BC, when the first emperor had just ascended to the throne. He was 13 years old at the time. The construction of this wonder required 35 years of work, and around 700,000 artisans collaborated on the work. Pit number 2 contains 1,400 subjects, cavalrymen to their horses and infantrymen. They were originally covered by a wooden roof and a layer of earth. But the roof collapsed in numerous places, and furthermore, the pit suffered destructive raids by rebels who burned and destroyed numerous statues. Here, the horses and warriors are not always nicely aligned in perfect condition. A museum portion includes intact pieces of the army, as they appeared when they were made. And another pit contains warriors wearing different uniforms. They are senior officers. The statues were mass-produced before being assembled and finally baked in ovens at 900 degrees. Then mineral colors were applied after firing, which further individualized them. The figures were then placed in military order depending on their rank, all of this demanding logistics and technology that are incredible for the time. The simple infantrymen, officers, warriors, scouts, archers, crossbowmen, and even acrobats and other performers thus each had their place in this great parade. This immortal and artificial army was meant to watch over the necropolis of the emperor while accompanying him in his death. Today, there are around 600 accompanying pits that have been identified. Pit number 3 contains 68 soldiers, 1 chariot, and 4 horses. It is a command post with high-ranking officers. The figurines measure between 1.7 and 1.85 meters, so they are a head taller than the soldiers of the era. These soldiers are arranged like an army corps turned towards the east, each carrying a bronze weapon, sword, bow, or crossbow. Sometimes covered in chrome, make them even sharper. But these weapons have since been either stolen, exhibited in various museums, or stored away out of sight, which explains the great majority of statues with empty hands. Moreover, the excavations are far from being finished, and only a small portion of the figurines have been reassembled. The famous site of the Grand Canyon is located in northwest Arizona. This national park was founded in 1919, and it covers a protected area of 4,927 square kilometers. Its natural diversity and its unique landscape led UNESCO to declare it a World Heritage Site in 1979. The Grand Canyon is a 450-kilometer-long gorge with a width ranging between 1.5 to 30 kilometers and a depth of 1,600 meters, dug out by the Colorado River and its affluents. It is a gigantic geological museum that renders nearly half of Earth's history visible, that is to say, 1.7 billion years. Indeed, the Colorado River, by digging its course through the region over the past 5 or 6 million years, has unearthed the various geological layers of North America's subsoil. At the bottom, the most ancient stratum of the cliff are nearly 2 billion years old, and the most recent, at the peak, are only 230 million years old. Among the many panoramic sites that line the canyon, Powell pays tribute to the first American who rode down the river by boat in 1869. But the area was inhabited prior to his arrival. For thousands of years, the region was populated by Native Americans who built dwellings within the canyon and its numerous caves. They considered it a holy site. The Anasazi arrived prior to the Navajo, around 1200 AD. The first known European to have seen the Grand Canyon was Garcia López de Cardenas, a Spanish conquistador who arrived here in 1540 looking for the 7 cities of gold. Aided by Native American guides, he did not descend into the bottom of the gorge. It was not until 1826 that a group of trappers, led by James Ohio Patty, finally reached the Colorado River. From this view, called the abyss, we can see the different geological layers superposed atop each other. These are schist and sandstone rocks. Around 65 million years ago, the plateau was lifted. This accelerated the flow of streams, rivers, and water runoff. Then, the Gulf of California opened up nearly 6 million years ago, which also accelerated the river's water flow by making the river more steep. In the late 19th century, faced with the majestic beauty of the site, many entrepreneurs developed the first panoramic sites in order to develop tourism. Over time, looking for the most picturesque spots along the cliff, they created and developed appropriate areas to set up camps where visitors could spend days or weeks. Today, there are many panoramic viewpoints that can be reached on foot or by car. Mather Point bears the name of the first director of the American National Park Service. His work and influence contributed to the establishment of the National Park Service in 1916, where he presided as its first director. At Moran Point, the 3 main layers of the Grand Canyon's rock are readily seen. Today, it is a favorite spot among photographers and painters who choose this side to capture the play of light and shadows on the canyon's tinted rock walls. While Navajo Point reminds us that this site was worshipped by Native Americans, the park welcomes nearly 5 million visitors annually.
900 kilometers from Havana, in the southeast of the island, Santiago de Cuba is the country's second major city. This port, founded in 1514, was the set of a decisive battle in the Spanish-American War, which led Cuba to its independence nearly 400 years later. The residents of Santiago are in fact proud that Fidel Castro described their city as the cradle of the revolution. Santiago de Cuba is known by the Cubans as Tierra Caliente, the hot earth. Not only because of its high temperatures which reign throughout the year, but also due to the warm and welcoming temperament of its residents. The Parque Céspedes, also called Cathedral Square, represents the heart of Santiago. The City Hall on the square's north side was built in the 1950s using old designs dating from 1783. It's from this balcony that Fidel Castro announced the triumph of the Cuban Revolution on the night of January 2nd, 1959. Opposite City Hall, the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Assumption is quite imposing. A cathedral had originally been built here around 1520, but it was looted many times over by pirates, then destroyed and rebuilt many times due to earthquakes. The current cathedral, with its two neoclassical bell towers, was built in 1922. On the left of the cathedral stands the oldest residence of Cuba, dating back to 1522. It belonged to the first colonial governor, Diego Velázquez. In Santiago de Cuba, around 1850, the trovadores, or troubadours, appeared. They were singer-songwriters who sang habaneras, puntos guaros, garachas, and boleros, alone or in groups, roaming from town to town. This rather romantic musical repertoire is called trova. The Casa de la Trova is located in Santiago de Cuba, and singers still gather here, sometimes accompanied by musicians. Cuba's second national hobby is without a doubt the game of dominoes. It's played in houses and in the street. It's a trans-generational game accessible to all. Much more than a simple board game, it offers a good taste of Cuban life. The Plaza de Dolores is the city's former market square. Today, the youth flock here, and once the hottest time of day has passed, they dance all day, proving, if there needs to be proof, that dancing is also one of Cuba's national sports. The Plaza de Marte is devoted to Mars, as its name indicates, the god of war par excellence. The site first welcomed military parades, and public executions took place here too. Redesigned in 1940, at its center, many commemorative sculptures were placed to honor the heroes of the wars of independence and the revolution. Like this one here, of Camilo Cienfuegos. The column of veterans that overlooks the plaza is topped with a Phrygian cap in red, white, and blue. It's the symbol of unity, of independence, and of the Republic's sovereignty. Close by, the Bacardi Museum is also of neoclassical style. It's Cuba's oldest museum. Emilio Bacardi Moro, who lived from 1844 to 1922, was a writer. He was also the first mayor of Santiago after the country acquired independence. Beside it, the palace of the provincial government also dates back to the early 20th century. It was built by the same architect who built the Bacardi Museum. Before becoming a legendary revolutionary figure, Fidel Castro spent his adolescence in this humble residence while he was a student in Catholic school and later among the Jesuits. Opposite the residence, the Museum of the Clandestine Struggle was opened in 1976 to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the armed rising in Santiago de Cuba on November the 30th, 1956. On that day, Frank Pais, a friend of Fidel Castro's, only 20 years old, seized this residence with a few men. At the time, it was the city's police precinct. This revolt, which was organized to occur at the time of the revolutionaries' landing, triggered the success of the Cuban Revolution. El Balcón de Velázquez is the site of a former Spanish fort, which offers a beautiful view over the rooftops of Tivoli and the port. This surveillance fort was built in the early 16th century when Santiago de Cuba was the island's capital city. Today it's a cultural center that holds various artistic performances such as theater and music. Another major site in Santiago, the Moncada Barracks, are an historical site of the Cuban Revolution. These barracks, which have been since converted into a school and a museum, were the target of the first attack by a small group of armed revolutionaries led by Fidel Castro on July the 26th, 1953. The young lawyer, surrounded by a small group of men, wanted to overthrow the dictator Batista, who had been brought to power by the United States a year earlier. It was a terrible defeat, and most of the revolutionaries were summarily executed. Castro was made prisoner and was pardoned 2 years later. The museum retraces the events of this assault. Though it had failed, it triggered the Cuban Revolution, which ended up conquering the establishment in 1959. Nestled in a unique Cuban landscape, Santiago is a city whose charm and warmth continued to delight history enthusiasts and those who appreciate the charm of colonial cities.
Located on the Moskva River, Moscow is the capital of the Russian Federation. This historic city combines the ancient and the modern: the Red Square, the Kremlin, the domes of St. Basil's Cathedral, Lenin's tomb, the Bolshoi, the KGB Museum, and other symbols of an exciting and tumultuous past abound in all the districts of the city. The architectural pearl of Moscow has always been and still remains the Kremlin. It is a fortified complex built at the end of the 15th century with the expertise of Italian and Russian architects. It is surrounded by a great wall that protects its cathedrals and palaces. The Grand Palace was built between 1837 and 1851. After having been the official residence of the Tsars and then the directors of the USSR, it is now the official residence and workplace of the President of the Russian Federation. The wall is pierced by powerful entry towers, like the Troitskaya Tower here, which once had a clock. Like all fortresses, the Kremlin had an armory, the arsenal which now houses the regiment responsible for the Russian president's security. The remains are exhibited like these Russian cannons mounted on 16th and 17th century carriages, or the 875 cannons taken from the enemy during the retreat of Napoleon's Grande Armée in 1812. There is also the Tsar Pushka, literally the king of the cannons. It's a gigantic cannon cast in 1586 by the order of Tsar Fyodor I, son of Ivan the Terrible. It weighs 39 tons and has a caliber of 890 millimeters. Continuing with its monumentality, the Tsar Kolokol is a master bell made of bronze that weighs 202 tons. The broken piece that came off when it fell is over 11 tons. It was cast in 1735 by a team of 200 men by order of Anna I to realize the dream of her grandfather Alexis I. Amongst the Kremlin's cathedrals, the bell tower complex of Ivan III the Great includes a bell tower, the church bell of the Nativity, and the Filarete bell tower. The structure was built during the 16th and 17th centuries and is located at the entrance of Cathedral Square, where the Cathedral of the Dormition is found. It was the first stone church in Moscow and is the oldest, largest, and most important in the Kremlin. On its steps, Ivan III the Great tore up the treaty that submitted Moscow to Mongol rule and thus declared the independence of Russia in the beginning of the 16th century. This church also marks Moscow's ascension to the status of the seat of the Russian Orthodox Church. On the inside, the iconostasis and the paintings that decorate the walls are particularly remarkable, from the 17th century for the most part. A Venetian Renaissance appearance strongly marks the exterior of the Cathedral of the Archangel Michael, even if the golden bulbs remind us that we're in Russia. Built in the beginning of the 16th century, its central door is topped by a circular pediment covered entirely by paintings. The victories of the Russian army were celebrated within its walls, where there is a 13-meter-high wooden iconostasis. There only remain a few fragments of the original paintings from the time of Ivan the Terrible. Indeed, it was repainted in the middle of the 17th century by 92 great Russian masters, in the style of the stone walls of the Renaissance. The church also serves as an acropolis for the Grand Princes of Moscow and the first Tsars, who thus rest under the protection of St. Michael. To go to Red Square now, you have to pass through the gates of the Resurrection. The first gate was built in 1535, but demolished under Stalin's rule to facilitate access to the square for military vehicles during parades. The first building that jumps out in the back of the square is the Cathedral of Basil the Blessed. The cathedral, built in 1555, is now the symbol of traditional Russian architecture. Tsar Ivan IV, known as the Terrible, ordered its construction to celebrate the annexing of Tatarstan by the Russian troops. The construction lasted 125 years, and the building has known many changes. The stairs were covered, the landings topped with pointed roofs, and the bulbs decorated with protruding patterns. The building is ornamented by 9 main cupolas, each different from the others in its own shape, decorations, and colors. The cathedral is in fact made of 9 separate churches, each one ornamented with a tower. The name Basil the Blessed comes from a figure who practiced a form of very provocative spirituality. He spent all his life naked and lived off charity. After his death, he was buried next to the church, and in 1588, a chapel was built on his tomb, where all those who sought the protection of the deceased came to pray. With time, his glory and holiness eclipsed the memory of the annexation of Tatarstan, and the church was consequently referred to more and more as Basil the Blessed. Later, Tsar Fyodor I placed a pure silver shrine covered with gold and silk above the relics of the saint's body, which was plundered by the Polish. The restorations carried out were very successful. Back to the Red Square. Along the wall, the Spasskaya Tower was once the ceremonial entrance of the Kremlin. To its right, there is Lenin's tomb, made of red granite. It was finished in 1930, and within it lies Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, the famous revolutionary and Soviet politician who died in 1924. Next to it, a small cemetery is reserved for other communist leaders. Since 1961, the body of the famous dictator Joseph Stalin has been buried there, in the shadow of the wall. You can see that Moscow is really a town that is marked and shaped by art. Painting, architecture, and historical movements mixed together in order to give visitors great surges of emotions. The Vatican, or more specifically the Vatican city-state, enclaved in the city of Rome, is the vassal territory of the Holy See. This enclave contains St. Peter's Basilica and Square, the Vatican Palace, which is the Pope's residence, 11 museums that include 5 galleries and 1,400 rooms. The number of annual visitors is above 5 million. Listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, St. Peter's Basilica, with its facade that gives out onto the square, is considered as the greatest work of architecture of its time. It remains one of the most visited monuments in the world. It is 219 meters long, and its dome peaks at 136 meters. Construction began in 1506 and was completed in 1626. Its most important architects are Bramante, Michelangelo, and Bernini. Between the giant Corinthian columns is the balcony where the Pope appears during the blessings. With a surface area of nearly 2.5 hectares and a holding capacity of 20,000, St. Peter's Basilica is the biggest Christian church. It is also one of the holy sites of Christianity, since it contains the sepulchre of St. Peter, who, according to tradition, was the first bishop of Rome, thus the first pope. Another wonder of the Vatican Museum is without a doubt the Sistine Chapel. It owes its name to Pope Sixtus IV, who had it built in the late 15th century. It is in this chapel that the cardinals traditionally gather in a conclave to elect the new pope. The frescoes were created by the greatest painters of the time: Domenico Ghirlandaio, Sandro Botticelli, Cosimo Rosselli, Pinturicchio, Luca Signorelli, and Perugino have left their works on the walls. Like here, the Passage of the Red Sea by Ghirlandaio, and the Punishment of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram by Botticelli. The Baptism of Christ by Perugino. And the Last Supper, again by Ghirlandaio. The chapel's vault was decorated with frescoes by the master of the masters, Michelangelo. It represents scenes from Genesis: the creation of the sun, the moon, Adam and Eve, the separation of land and water, of darkness and light, the original sin, etc. The creation of Adam is undoubtedly the most famous of the 9 frescoes. It illustrates the biblical line, "So God created mankind in his own image." The work is especially famous for a detail in which the index finger of God joins that of Adam's without touching it and gives life to man. At the base of the building, 7 prophets and 5 sibyls sit on a monumental throne and redact sacred texts. The impressive representations, which reveal a perfect understanding of bodily movements in human anatomy, radically transformed Western painting. It took Michelangelo 4 years to paint the entirety of the ceiling at the Sistine Chapel. In 1532, at the age of 60, Michelangelo returned to Rome after having stayed in Florence for many years. The Pope then asked him to replace the paintings at the 2 extremities of the Sistine Chapel by 2 grandiose representations. Only one was created, that of the Last Judgment. The fresco spreads out over a vast wall that is 13 meters high and 12 meters wide. The artist composed a scene that is both orderly and lively. It offers a torturous and painful interpretation of the Last Judgment, very far from the majestic calm seen in traditional representations. At the time, the work created a scandal, for its 400 or so characters, including Christ, are entirely nude. The Pope then considered destroying the composition, but he limited himself to veiling certain characters. Certainly one of the greatest painters in the history of art, Michelangelo had considerable influence over his peers. His manner of painting and sculpting was profusely copied by the representatives of what came to be called the mannerism of the late Renaissance. The son of a modest family, he subscribed to Platonic idealism. Michelangelo was a melancholic and very solitary man. He never married. He led a very simple life, and contrary to the other artists of his time, he was never eager to acquire wealth. He was entirely devoted to his art. The site of Angkor contains other sacred sites, including that of the Citadel of Women, Banteay Srei, which is entirely dedicated to Shiva, who represents destruction, transformation, and the future. Circled by an exterior moat, it was built in the 10th century using a pink sandstone that takes on different tints depending on the position of the sun. Unlike the Temple Mountains, Banteay Srei is a flat temple that has 3 enclosures. It is in quite good condition and has sculptures of exceptional finesse. Despite its relatively modest size, you can spend hours looking at its statues, its carved facades, and its door lintels depicting Khmer mythology. It's virtually goldsmithery with stone. The French School of the Far East carried out its first major restoration at Banteay Srei in 1930, and the complete success of this undertaking made it possible to open the path for many other sites across all of Angkor. The sculptures and statues are taken from Indian mythology, with many representations of scenes from the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. The multiple gopuras of the 3 enclosures, the finesse of the sculptures of the pediment scenes, especially those of the North and the South libraries, the beautiful color of its pink sandstone, and the exceptional quality of its decorations and sculptures make it clear that the temple is a jewel of Khmer art. Today, it is considered one of the most beautiful sights of the East. At Angkor, before all of these wonders, we can only quote one of the first Western visitors, a Portuguese monk who came to the site in 1586 and declared, "These temples are of such extraordinary construction that it is not possible to describe them on paper, even more so because they are not like the other buildings in the world. There are towers, decorations, and all the refinements that human genius can conceive." In addition, this region of Angkor remains very focused on religion and the mystical. Because despite the state of neglect of the site in the 15th century and the influx of tourists, the temple of Angkor Wat remains an important site of pilgrimage. Located to the east of Angkor Thom, north of the road that leads to the Victory Gate, the Thomanon is a Hindu temple built in the 12th century. It consists of a single enclosure surrounded by a ditch moat, containing 2 gopuras, libraries, and a tower shrine. It has bas-relief and high-relief decorations of remarkable quality, where the Ramayana occupies an important place. The Ramayana, along with the Mahabharata, is one of the fundamental texts of Hinduism, composed between the 3rd century BC and the 3rd century AD. Made up of 24,000 verses, the Ramayana recounts the birth and education of Prince Rama, who is the 7th avatar of the god Vishnu. The Ramayana contains many tales, but it is not exclusively religious. It also contains legendary, mythical, or cosmic tales, like the creation of the Earth, for example. On the other side of the road that leads from the city of Angkor Thom to the Victory Gate, the Chao Sai Tavoda is from the same era as the Thomanon. This temple mountain was also encircled by a single wall, surrounded by a ditch moat, and it has 4 gopuras in the 4 cardinal directions, libraries, and a tower shrine. Here too, the bas-relief and high-relief decorations are of remarkable quality and foreshadow the style of Angkor Wat. The Atacama Desert is located in northern Chile, where it is the widest at the border with Argentina and Bolivia. The Atacama is among the most arid deserts in the world. Just south of the tropic, along the volcanic belt, is the salt flat of Aguas Calientes, the warm waters. Many permanent and seasonal lakes are located in this depression, which is in fact a salt desert. Wind erosion is very severe here. Which makes the water unfit for human consumption and agriculture. River that flows from the north, which carries dissolved gem and gypsum salts. In these breathtaking landscapes, the vegetation is extremely rare, even non-existent. Here, it is limited to small tufts of grass that are called rica rica. They resemble thyme. The Salar shelters many rare species and species that are in danger of extinction, among them the vicuna, which is not to be confused with the llama. A part of the South American camelid family, it is the smallest of all camelids, with a height of less than 1 meter. This animal cannot be domesticated. Another place of astonishing raw beauty, Piedras Rojas, the red stones. Located on the bank of a lagoon, these gigantic stones are an ancient volcanic lava flow. Their intense red color holds the secrets of the fascinating history of the Andean mountains. The ancient and recent lava flows from volcanoes nearby remind us that the South American continent glides on the Pacific plate at a speed of 1.5 centimeters per year. The continent rises to the east by creating magmatic activity, and this has been happening for 185 million years. This movement and its volcanic activity is called the Pacific Ring of Fire. The flow of lava, fire, and burning stones from the entrails of the Earth results from this tectonic movement. Here too, thousands of circular tufts of rica rica and paja brava, wild hay, a highly resistant golden grass, stretch out over the altiplano. Between volcanoes and desert land, the Chilean altiplano shelters two magnificent emerald-colored lagoons, Miscanti and Meñiques. At an altitude of over 4,200 meters, the blue of the water between the mountains is breathtaking. The air is pure and the silence is so intense you can hear it. The two saltwater lagoons formed a few thousand years ago due to the eruption of the Meñiques volcano. The Meñiques lagoon gets its water from the Miscanti by underground channels, and the solidified lava retains water. The landscapes are magical. The earth, water, volcanoes, and sky form an extraordinary ensemble of colors and silence that plunge visitors in a state of admirative contemplation. One might tend to believe that such hostile regions do not belong to man. But the Atacama Desert is rich in minerals, notably copper, iron, gold, and silver. It was also exploited for its great amounts of saltpeter, a crucial element for the chemical industry, especially for the production of fertilizers, gunpowder, and explosives. The region was affected by these mining activities, which were highly strategic, and borders popped up. In 1879, the Saltpeter War pitted Bolivia and Peru against Chile. Chile, the victor of the war, deprived Bolivia of its single access to the sea by annexing the region. The native populations thus became Chilean after having been Bolivian, and Chile then prohibited coca and indigenous languages. But all the Atacameños have cousins in Bolivia and Argentina, and therein resides Andean culture. Borders do not exist. Most of the desert is made up of rocky terrain, of salt lakes called salars, of sand and lava flows. A few villages are scattered throughout, home to a few souls. This place at the end of the world, with its wild beauty, reveals the force of life, which manages to hang on and adapt to conditions that seem to be the worst on Earth. A fascinating desert, this site is a must-see for amateurs of geology, hiking, history, and ethnology. It is indeed a fine spot for those who want to flee civilization, its noise, and its temptations.
De sus movimientos metálicos